Dear Diary, I still wonder why Dad was taken away from us so early. We needed him, we all did, and we still think about him and wish he was here every day. He was such a fun, outgoing and happy father that got along with everyone. He was the best dad anyone could want. Dad loved spending time with us and we loved spending time with him. He used to take us out four-wheel driving, come along to our sporting events, and would always love to please us however he could. We were his top priority. I miss his stories about his work and the interesting things he did throughout his short life. I'll never forget the day Mum and Dad sat my brother and I down and told us the bad news. I knew something must be wrong because Dad just hadn't been himself for weeks. I noticed he was getting tired all the time. He looked a lot skinnier than normal and white like a ghost. I finally found out why my brother and I had to go over to the neighbours a lot after school. It was because Mum and Dad were going to a lot of appointments with doctors. They finally told us that he had bowel cancer. My first reaction was shock. How did they know this? They went on to tell us that Dad had talked about it with his doctor and undergone heaps of tests I'd never heard of, like a colonoscopy, MRI scans, special kind of x-rays and blood tests, and bowel cancer was the result. They assured us that the doctors had found it very early, stage A they called it, and that Dad should be okay after he has surgery to cut out the cancer. The next few months were hectic, but they went so fast. Dad had surgery and heaps of appointments and tests, but we finally got the all clear. We thought he was cured. Most things went back to normal, with Dad having his regular checkups and constantly taking his medication. Until about 6 years later, when it all went wrong again. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of Dad moaning like he was in pain. The one day he came home from one of his checkups with Mum in tears. It was back. Mum, Dad, my brother and I had a special meeting with the doctor, who explained the cancer had returned to stage D and had spread to Dad's liver as well. After that it was hard to listen, a lot of medical words and explanations being told to us. But basically the doctor was telling us that there was nothing they could do to get rid of the cancer, and that my dad was going to die. I started to cry. Everything got really hard after that. Although there was nothing to fix the cancer, Dad was always going into the hospital for chemotherapy and something Mum called monoclonal antibody treatment. Mum said they weren't going to make Dad completely better, but would hopefully give him a little bit more time together and would help Dad feel better because he was in a lot of pain. Even though I tried to forget the cancer and just enjoy Dad, I felt like it was always in the back of our mind. We were always preparing for him to leave. One day after school, Dad was in the car with Mum to pick us up. I was so excited because he must have gotten off work early to come watch my swimming training. But no, we ended up having to go to some boring lawyer office for Mum and Dad to sign a bunch of papers, an enduring power of attorney and enduring guardianship. Mum explained that these meant that when Dad was too sick to make decisions for himself, Mum would make them for him. That would be one of the hardest things to do, I reckon. One day I'll always remember is the day that Dad decided to leave his job as a civil engineer after his second diagnosis. He was passionate about his job and always wanted to provide for our family. And this was one way that he could. I couldn't imagine how it must have been for him to give up one of the things he loved, but I knew he did it to spend whatever time he had left with us. Since he left his job, Dad spent most of his time at home, catching up with family or friends. I noticed people I hadn't seen in a long time were coming to visit us, and there were other people helping out or checking up on him throughout the day on a regular basis. There were many changes that were happening. One thing I noticed was that Dad was always getting tired easily, doing the simplest of tasks, and wasn't as outgoing as he used to be. In the last months we got to spend with him, it seemed like he wasn't himself, and our relationship just wasn't the same. It was hard not knowing what to expect, and hard seeing him change in so many different ways. I could often see that he was in pain, even though he tried to hide it. The look on his face gave it away, and I could tell he was struggling to deal with it all. I heard Mum and Dad arguing in the bedroom one day. I knew I shouldn't, but I stopped at the door and tried to listen through the slight opening. I didn't really understand why they kept arguing. Shouldn't they just try and be happy with the time that we had? I thought they were arguing about going on a holiday, that Dad wanted to go overseas or something. I didn't know why Mum would argue with that. I'd love to go overseas. Dad said this euthanasia word a few times. The weirdest word, hey? At the time, I thought maybe it was a place Dad wanted to visit, somewhere in China or something. When I googled it, I found out just how wrong I was. Assisted suicide kept coming up. I couldn't stop thinking, no way, suicide? Isn't that like heaps bad? Pretty sure I remember one of the priests at church talking about the sin of suicide. It was such a shock to think of my dad, who insists I get out of bed every Sunday morning, no matter what, to go to Mass, and prays with me every night. Even thinking of such a thing was a sinful thought. I read a bit more about it. about how it was meant to stop the suffering of people with terminal illness. I thought about Dad's face when I knew he was in pain, but was trying to be brave. Maybe euthanasia wouldn't be such a bad thing. Not that it's legal in Australia anyway. There seem to be a few places in Europe where it's legal. Maybe that's why Dad talked about going overseas. After that day, though, I never heard Dad talk about euthanasia again. I did notice he started praying more during the day, though. I never understood why he tried to hide how he was feeling, or why he didn't want to talk to us kids about what he was going through. We were, and will always be, his family. Maybe it was because he didn't want us to remember him like that. I have so many unanswered questions, but no one to answer them. I wish I had more time to spend with him, and I constantly think about what it would be like if he was still with us. When Dad's cancer came back, everything was different to the first time. Because the doctor said there was nothing they could do to this cancer, Dad started getting people from the palliative care team. I'd heard of palliative care before, but I had always thought it was something that helped old people when they were dying. How Dad explained it to me was that there are a group of different health professionals that would try to help him and our family through his final stages. Different people would come to visit the house, but I think it was the pastoral worker that really helped Dad out. It was really good having her there, because Dad's beliefs really meant a lot to him, so it was good to see that they weren't forgotten or ignored during a time when we all just needed something to believe in. And what really surprised me was that they didn't just focus on Dad, they included all of us, even Auntie Jill and my grandparents, which at first I thought was a bit strange. But now that I look back on it all, I don't know how we would have coped if we didn't have that opportunity. So for about 5 months, they would come to the house to provide support for Dad. Most of the time, the main focus was just making sure that he wasn't in any pain. They tried a few different things to help Dad out. I mean, he was always in pain. They were never going to stop it. They just tried to make it as little as possible. But after a while, it just became too much. When Dad moved into hospice, that was when things got really tough, because it was good to see that Dad was in less pain, but it also meant that we saw Dad less, and going home each night was really hard without him there. There are a few different people involved with Dad, including doctors, nurses, social workers, occupational therapists, pastoral worker and physio, and they all did their best to make sure that Dad was as comfortable as possible. Well, I guess comfortable isn't really the right word. They tried to reduce the pain and the nausea, and basically help Dad with any problems that he had, not just physically, but emotionally too. It was really good having the support of the palliative care team within the hospice, especially the nurses and the few OTs that worked with us. There were so many people involved in Dad's care that it was hard to keep track of names, but the one I remember most was Katie. She was an occupational therapist. Katie met with us at home, and she spent a lot of time talking with Dad about what was important for him at that moment, and she asked him things about what he wanted to achieve before he died. She helped Dad set goals which he'd given up on since he'd become unwell, and that he thought he wouldn't be able to do anymore. The most important thing for Dad was simply spending with us what time he had left. He worried a lot about how he would cope when he died, and not once did he put his needs first. It was always ours. I admire him for that. One of Dad's goals was to be as independent as possible at home. He hated the idea of relying on us, his family, to help with things that he felt he should be able to do, because he'd always been able to do them. Katie really helped Dad out with this. She talked with him about how to conserve his energy so he didn't get tired really quick, and she gave him different pieces of equipment too to help him move around easily. Not only did these things help Dad do things at home on his own, but he had the chance to go and watch my brother's soccer final and go fishing with his mates one last time. Those days were probably one of Dad's most memorable. While Dad was able to do things using this equipment, I noticed that as he got worse and worse, Katie would bring more and more equipment over for him to use to try and make him comfortable. He was in a lot of pain and tried so hard to hide this from me and my brother. Mum would always try to help Dad with things, but he was just so stubborn. He was sure he could do it on his own. But toward the end, when he got really bad, and he couldn't do things for himself anymore, he decided it was time to go into the hospice. This was probably the hardest thing Dad did. For him, it meant losing his independence. From then on, things changed a lot, and the days got harder and harder for all of us. Even though Dad couldn't do a lot on his own anymore, Katie really helped us to find things we could do as a family. One day I will always remember was one of the last few days we had with him. It was a Friday. Me, Mum and my brother were all with him at the hospice, and he asked Katie if we could cook a meal together as a family. Dad loved to cook, especially for his family and friends. Friday nights were family nights, and we'd nearly always have a barbecue. Katie was so great. She helped us get the ingredients and set things up. There we were, cooking Dad's favourite meal. Even though Dad didn't take much part in the cooking, he wasn't worried. The smile on his face as he watched us cook together as a family is one of the best memories I have of my dad. I owe that to Katie. I never truly appreciated family Friday nights until then, and that was the last one I had. I'd give anything to have it again. Before Dad got sick, I never really thought about dying. I guess as a teenager, you just assume that death's something you don't have to deal with until you get old. To be honest, I'd always avoided the subject because it was really quite scary to think about. I'll never forget the day when one of Dad's nurses told me that dying was a natural part of living. At first I was really angry because I thought she was telling me it was time to give up on Dad. But as I talked more and more with Dad, I began to understand that dying was unavoidable and that the process was different for everyone. This was just my dad's story. I feel like Dad was eventually accepted what was happening to him, but I got the feeling he was never okay with how it was affecting me and Mum and my brother. In his final days, I could see the pain in his eyes. He agonised over leaving us, but there was nothing anyone could do. I wanted to reassure him that we would be okay, but I knew deep down in myself, I wasn't sure if we would be. After Dad died, the palliative care team linked us with the bereavement support program. There were people to talk to and counsellors and lots of information about what to expect after someone close to you dies. I guess the most valuable lesson I learnt is that grief is normal and it's okay that everyone deals with it differently. There were days when I couldn't bring myself to leave my room and days when I was just physically sick. It was on these days that I would wonder if my life would ever be easy again. One of the counsellors from the bereavement support group linked me with some other teenagers who were in similar situations. We connected over Facebook, and I felt like finally there was someone out there who I could totally be honest with. It's been nearly 2 years since Dad died, and I think my family is coping in our own way. We spend lots of time together, talking about Dad and the things he used to do. We even managed to get a few laughs in. I wouldn't say we are okay, but we're taking small steps in that direction. I still struggle to think about my graduation, my wedding, knowing that Dad won't be there to cheer me on or walk me down the aisle. It's really hard. Every day I wonder what life would be like if Dad was still here with us. I think this experience has changed who I am. I think I see the world through different eyes. I see sadness everywhere I look, but at the same time, I've learnt that some of the simplest things in life can hold so much value.